Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today in our design talk, the first one in Ramadan. And today we have Mr. Eric Broug in a talk about Islamic architecture, a world history. Eric have MA in History of Islamic Art and Architecture from the School of Oriental and African Studies, in London, self-taught in Islamic Geometric Design with over 30 years of dedication and experience in this topic. 4 books published with Thames and Hudson in UK of Islamic Geometric Design and Islamic Architecture. Other 2 books self-published, including one manual for architects titled Best Practice in Islamic Geometric Design. Books have been translated to Turkish, French, Farsi, Korean, Chinese, created a TED-Ed video on Islamic geometric design, worked 10 years in academic publishing as a business manager for Africa and Middle East, opened a shop in the pandemic, and selling homeware and gifts from around the world. Mr. Eric, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
And also thank you for accepting our invitation and having this talk with us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. First of all, Ramadan Kareem to all of you. I'm honored to be able to present on my book, and I'd like to thank ArchiNet for inviting me.
Most welcome.
What I want to talk about today is the book that is coming out in a few months, and some things associated with that. So I'll just share my screen and start, I think.
Yes, go ahead, please.
There you go. Okay. So this is the cover, the beautiful door from Cairo of the Sultan Muayyid Sheikh Mosque from the Mamluk era. And I was very pleased to find this photo, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But you know, when you write a book for a publisher like Thames Hudson, who are a big commercial publisher, they're great, right? I mean, I'm very happy with them, and they're happy with me. I think the 2 things about which I do not have a say is the title of the book and the cover of the book. And I can give my input, but they end up, choosing what they think is going to be the most impactful and most commercial cover that would suit the book. And this is what they came up with. And I'm very pleased, of course, because it looks great. So what I want to do is to show you photos from the book, not all of them, of course, otherwise you wouldn't have to buy it anymore. Just a few impressions of what is in the book, what I've tried to do, how it's different from other preceding books, perhaps. So the first 2 photos in the book are these 2. And the reason I chose these, or we chose these photos, was to just defy people's expectations, really, because with a topic like Islamic architecture, especially for an audience like I'm talking to today, I guess, but more generally speaking, it's true, people have a certain expectation of what they would find in a book on this topic. And for me, it was really a challenge to show the things that people love and that they're familiar with, but beyond that, also show things that they are not familiar with and will come to love, hopefully. So in my talk, I'll try and name most of the buildings. If memory helped me, but I think I'll be okay. So the one on the left is in Tbilisi. It's a bathhouse built in the style of Persian architecture, as you can see, but just a building in Tbilisi built in the 19th century. And then on the right is a mosque in Burkina Faso. Lovely photo. So those are the 2 photos that you see before you even get to the contents page. Now, just to give you a bit of an overview of what is in the book, I'll show you 2 slides that show you the table of contents. So there's 6 chapters. These are the first 3. And you can see that we've categorized everything by country. And You can have a look, see if your country is in there. Hopefully it will be. I've tried to make it as global as possible, because you can see that the title of the book is Islamic Architecture, a World History. And that's what I've tried to do. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. But in the meantime, have a look. There's a lot of, certainly in the first 3 chapters, there's a lot of familiar countries in there, of course. And then these are the other 3 chapters. So a lot of Africa, not just North Africa either. Asia Pacific is quite often underrepresented. It was always underrepresented, really. And it's weird because there's lots of wonderful things to see there, but you don't really read about it if you pick up an average book on Islamic architecture. And then Europe and Americas, you can see by the countries that are in there, there's a lot of, well, Europe obviously, but there's also Russia, Poland's in Europe, of course, USA, Chile, Ecuador, Mexico's in there as well. And then the pictures that we've chosen, or that the book designer has chosen, the ones at the top, we've just done as something with a lot of visual impact. And then at the end of those 6 chapters are 2 separate sections. One is on women in Islamic architecture, which is about 8 pages. And then I've done 2 pages on Waqf, which, it would be crazy to write a book about Islamic architecture and not to talk about Waqf. So I've tried to do it in a way that's not dull or not boring or academic. And I've tried to write it as an interesting story using a 15th century Timurid poet, Ali Shir Navai. I don't know if some of you are familiar with him. So he was a very famous literary figure who made the Turkic language popular in the same way that, for example, Dante did for Italian and Chaucer did for English. But he wrote a lot, and he also wrote something about a waqf of his in Herat, and it's super fascinating. It's really descriptive. How much money is spent on what, who should be employed, that sort of thing. So anyway, if you want to read it, you'll have to buy the book. I did a special section on women in Islamic architecture, hopefully for obvious reasons, because it's not something that's really focused on at all. And there are so many. As I was researching the book, you come across so many great stories and female patrons and wives of and mothers of rulers who on their own were really important in the commissioning of buildings and the commissioning of infrastructure. So I thought a book like this would benefit from a special section like that. So, like I said, what I want to talk about is, well, what's the book about? And also, what have we been missing in Islamic architecture? And I'll elaborate a little bit about that in a moment. I'll talk a little bit about how I ended up writing this book, because for me, that's also, well, still amazing, right? That, there are so many people in the world who study Islamic architecture, who teach Islamic architecture. Nevertheless, this has ended up in my lap, really, as my task. So how did that happen? And then also I want to talk about what didn't make it into the book, just because it's interesting, I hope. So the picture I've shown on the right here, that's the Friday Mosque of Kerman in Iran. And this is the back cover of the English edition. But because we're also having a German and an Italian edition, the Germans wanted this to be the front cover, which is their prerogative. So in the English edition, this is on the back. In the German edition, this is on the front. And I don't know what the Italians are going to do. We'll see. Yes, so what I wanted to do when I wrote this book, so I studied Islamic architecture at SOAS, and it's something that's been my life, my passion for forever, really, along with Islamic geometric design. I've also worked in bookshops for many years. I worked for publishers. And when you do that, you see, I see, you look at books in a particular way. And for me, it's really, I want to write a beautiful book, but I want to write an effective book, more importantly. And an effective book is a book that people find useful and will use. And quite often with art books, and I know this from my own behavior, I have art books, but do I ever read an art book? No, I don't. I'll look at the pictures, and that's and if the pictures are nice, I'll read the captions. And maybe if the captions are interesting, I'll read the text. But I don't think very many people sit down with a big art book like this one. This is going to be a big hardcover. People sit down and say, right, chapter 1, let's go. It doesn't work like that. So I took that into consideration. Also, because the book is really about detail and about visual impact in Islamic architecture. I thought a lot of the people who are interested in these things consume or choose to consume information visually, not through words. If you look at how people consume information on the internet, more people look at YouTubes than read text. So I thought, well, why fight that? If I'm going to write a book, I'll let the pictures do the talking. I'll do large captions, and that's more or less it. And that should be enough. And I think if I do it like that, I've got a bigger chance of people actually digesting the information, because the captions are short and I think, okay, I can deal with a brief caption rather than I have to sit down and read a whole chapter. So that's how the book is structured. Also, books are a global product nowadays, and for a publisher like Thames Hudson, who I'm blessed to publish with, not only do they make beautiful books, but they also have great distribution, which means that if you're in Saudi, you can buy my books, or if you're in the UAE, you can buy my books, or in Pakistan. This is not the norm, right? This is exceptional, and that's why I'm so happy to be with them, because I know that if I make a book, it will end up around the world, potentially on the shelves of bookshops and in people's homes. But that also means that not everybody has English as their first language, and not everybody is in the habit of reading English. So that was also a consideration. I thought, well, how can I make this book globally accessible? And that means making the pictures important. So that was really my consideration. Beyond that, because I studied Islamic architecture, you find that there's a narrow focus, right? And if you didn't know better, you would think that Islamic architecture only exists in the Middle East and North Africa, and maybe Iran and Afghanistan and Iraq and India, and that it stopped being interesting by the 17th century, because that's how academic articles are. They all write about very narrowly about the same region. They write about topics that are very specialized, and quite often articles are articles about previous articles. So it means that there's a whole big parts of the world that you hardly find anything. It's to me, it's nuts. So, for example, if you look at Southeast Asia, and I'll show some examples of that, I really struggled to find a single academic article about certain really important buildings. So I thought, well, this book is also an opportunity to really show it globally, which means that it's Islamic architecture, but also the influence of Islamic architecture. I should also say that when I was writing the book, I didn't call it Islamic architecture, because it's not the best term, right? In my own mind, I called it architecture of Islamic societies, which is better, but it's not as catchy as for a book cover, and ultimately the publisher decides. So I'm happy with the title, but in my own mind, it could be a bit more nuanced, and it is more nuanced once you open the pages. So this is a mosque in Bijapur in India, really fantastic. You can see all the architectural detail on there. It's really, it's a total gem. So what I wanted to do, I mean, there's several things that needed to happen in the book. So I wanted to show familiar buildings, or I have to show familiar buildings, but then show them in a different way. I think that this book is really my pandemic project. And I think So we have about 350 photos in the book. Initially, I had 700, but the publisher just laughed at me. No way. Which is sensible, of course. But I think I must have looked at 500,000 photos during the pandemic. I'm not even exaggerating. Just to find the best, just to find those fantastic photos that show a particular building in a new way, in the most beautiful way, in the most unfamiliar way. So on the left is the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus, of course, and this is a great photo. Beautiful color. You can see the glass mosaics. I just love it. Picture on the right. So funnily enough, photos of buildings in Saudi were amongst the most difficult, and I'll explain why later. One of the obvious reasons is that, of course, I would have a photo of the Kaaba in there, but then what photo? What photo is a beautiful photo? What photo says it tells a story? So ultimately, I found the photo on the right, which I was extremely happy with, because you can see, people walking past, people being pushed in wheelchairs, people sitting down. It tells a whole story. I think it's magic. So I was very happy with that. Although my book designer didn't like it, but I had to put my foot down and say, no, we must have it. This, I don't know if you can recognize this. It's a masterpiece of Islamic architecture, of course, but shown from a different perspective. So this is the Selimiye Mosque in Edirne. Mimar Sinan's masterpiece. And beautiful aerial shot. What's not to like? I thought it's a beautiful photo. It's almost isometric. You can really see what's going on. So this is on the double page. So that's going to look great when you open the book. So when you look for photos, it's just such a, well, for me, I had 18 months to write the book, or I gave myself 18 months to write the book. And my way of working on anything creative is that I'm in fourth gear the whole time until it's finished. Right? So it's like, that's really how it is. So I was always looking for, okay, that's a good photo, but is there maybe a better photo? You look at the usual resources. Sometimes some photos I found on Instagram, and then I would have to send a direct message to the account saying, please tell me you took this beautiful photo with a proper camera, not your camera phone. And that's how I got the cover photo that made by the cover photo of those two doors, made by an Egyptian lady who posted it on Instagram, and I thought, oh, this is great. And thank goodness she used a professional camera. Otherwise, we couldn't have used it. So I don't know if you know what this is. Some of you might. It's Bir al-Arwa, the Well of Souls. This is a cave underneath the Dome of the Rock. And it has the world's first mihrab. I've got a photo in the book. It's just behind that little wall where at the front, you can't see it in this photo. So this is also architecture, of course, and the story is that that this cave, it's a cave under the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. This cave was created when Muhammad ascended to the heavens and the rock wanted to follow him, basically. And hence the cave was created. So, it's the nice thing for me is that because I'm what they call an independent scholar, right? So I'm not affiliated with a university and such, which sometimes is a hindrance. But ultimately, it's given me the freedom to write a book without having to target an audience of my peers. So it means I have freedom to choose what I think will be best suited for the book. And then, of course, I also have the freedom from my publisher, who said, look, make a beautiful book, and and they've been really supportive. So to put a photo like this in, I think, it's such an important space. It's such an important sacred religious space. But do you ever see it in a book? Not really. So now you do. And also the mihrab, which is very small and modest. Lovely thing. Similarly with So quite often, general books on Islamic art and architecture are typically 65 or 70% art, and the rest is architecture, which means there's not a lot of space to put buildings in. And then because they only have a few pages in a book like that, they'll put in all the usual suspects, right? You have the Dome of the Rock, and you have the Alhambra, and things like that. And rarely do you see a really good photo of Al-Aqsa. This is Al-Aqsa Mosque, taken by a friend of mine, actually, a Jordanian photographer called Bashar Taba, who you should check out because he's crowdfunded a beautiful book of his photos of the Dome of the Rock in Al-Aqsa. So I can anyway, look at that. Bashar Taba, his website is mapandalens.com. So he takes fantastic photos. He really does. And I saw this photo of his and said, I must have this photo. Just because it's so rare to see a really great photo of Al-Aqsa Mosque. So this is also a double page, a DPS as the publishers call it, double page spread. So really big photo. Now, of course, a book on Islamic architecture without the Dome of the Rock is inconceivable, but then which photo, right? It's like with the Kaaba, what photo would it be? So this is, I love this photo. We almost put this photo on the cover, actually. Yeah, it tells a story, right? It's a story. I love it. Great colors, beautiful light. Now, this is the another one of those typical buildings that you would always find in the general book on Islamic art and architecture is the Tokapi Palace. This is in the Tokapi Palace. It's one of the kiosks, and it's the photo itself is great. Beautiful light and beautiful detail, and there's an amazing story attached to it as well. Not a very happy story, but an interesting story nevertheless. I'm happy to tell you briefly what that is. So this is one of the kiosks. The Ottomans were always very worried that brothers or sons would try and kill off each other so that they could be the Sultan. Right, so it would make the empire unstable. So they had these two kiosks, which were basically very fancy prison cells. And for example, Sultan, let me have a look. Suleiman II became Ottoman Sultan in 1687, and he spent 46 years of his life in one of these fancy cells before he was let free and could become Sultan. Really amazing. So details is also, initially the book was going to be completely about details, but we mixed it up a little bit. But I love the little mosque top left. That's Ottoman. It's made for birds, and there's a spiritual aspect to it as well. But it's just great, Then there's other examples. The column on the left is in Diyarbakir in an Ottoman Mosque. I find that fascinating. That they would make a column like that. How does that work? Does the stonemason think I'm going to do this? This will be cool, or does the client say, "Look, can you make this for me?" And how would he explain it if he did? It's an amazing piece of work. So sometimes I just come across photos that are just great, and I'm not looking for a photo of a particular building, but I'm just looking at photos. And this is in Ethiopia, a temporary mosque in the desert. Apparently, people who travel past bring wood, and the wood that is left is used to construct a minaret and a structure on the left, a prayer hall. It's temporary, but amazing. It's also a lovely photo. This is also a double page spread. This is a late Mamluk dome interior. Just the colors with the pink and the yellow. I think it's fabulous. So the freedom I have is to choose photos just because they're beautiful, which is what a publisher wants and which is what I want as well. And they have to tell a story, and that, but it doesn't have to. I'm not obliged to choose only the most important buildings. No, I felt obliged to choose the most beautiful photos of the most interesting buildings. This, of course, is quite well known. This is in Mali. Yeah, so this is in, I think, Philippines, but correct, I'm not 100% sure. But lovely photo. And Southeast Asia is, it's one of those chapters where almost every building that I put in there, many of them were new to me and will be new to readers as well. Some of you might know where this is. This is Bayt al-Quran in Bahrain. Beautiful screen, glass dome, glass window. So this is also very interesting. This is in Italy. This is called the Castello Samazzano. They're on Instagram. They're quite a good account to follow. So this is a palace that is a couple of centuries old, but was renovated in the 19th century by a gentleman who, in the 19th century in Europe and around the world, the sort of so-called Moorish architecture, well, there was a Moorish revival, and this was all very much in fashion, using what they called Moorish architecture as a source of inspiration. And I've got a lot of things in my book showing that. This is one of the most extreme ones. So this palace has 365 rooms, one for each day of the year, and very many of them are inspired by Islamic architecture, Moorish architecture. I mean, this one is, they're all really in your face and full color. It's really extraordinary. So have a look. Castello Samazzano. That's what it's called. And it was hard to choose because there were so many rooms. They're all so expressive and amazing. The pink mosque in Manindanao in the Philippines. The publisher wanted this on the cover of the book, but I said no, that's a bit too frivolous. But it's amazing. It's what can I say about this? I mean, it's a pink mosque. This is in Germany, in Dresden, and it's a cigarette factory built in the early 20th century. And the minaret is the chimney, and the glass dome used to be the staff room. And it's in Dresden, which is a very famous city in Germany, of course. At the beginning of the 20th century, you were not allowed to build factories in the center or in the city that looked like factories, because the city is so beautiful, they didn't want this ugly architecture. So the gentleman, Jewish gentleman who owned this Yenidze brand of cigarettes, Turkish cigarettes, he built it in a style of something that he thought was appropriate to his product. And funnily enough, on the side of the building in big neon letters is the brand of the cigarette, which is Salam Aleikum. So anybody who was traveling into Dresden by train in the 20th century, the first thing they would see was big red neon letters greeting them with Salam Aleikum in this German city. It's quite funny. Also unusual things. This on the left is in the south of France. Looks like something that you would see in sub-Saharan Africa. This was built bizarrely by the French army, who during the First World War used a lot of soldiers from Senegal, one of their colonies. They were called the tirailleurs. And they built this so that the Senegalese soldiers would not feel so homesick while they were in barracks in France. And they made it. It's not actually a mosque. It looks like a mosque, but it was more used as a community center. They even built termite mounds out of concrete and painted them red to make it even more authentic. Yeah, so extraordinary stories. Anyway, so this is in Algeria, very old, very unusual. Le Corbusier, famous modernist architect, came to visit this, and it was a big inspiration for his chapel in Ronchamp, apparently. And you can see why. It's all these wide surfaces, small apertures. Pretty amazing. So this is a mausoleum, or a shrine, I should say. I mean, extraordinary building, and also really a really great photo. I was very happy to find this one. On the left, another mosque. This one is in Ghana. Really extraordinary. I mean, the photo itself I love as well. It almost looks like a scene from Star Wars in a way, with the gentleman with his big dark red cloak. So it tells a story as well. Picture on the right, I mean, some of you will know this. This is in Khartoum, in Sudan, the famous Al-Nilin Mosque, which is also an interesting story. The picture on the bottom right, I was very happy to find that photo, and it was a big job for me to get information about this building. I ended up speaking to the architect, an elderly gentleman now who designed this. the story is that when this mosque was built, the top right mosque was built. It's very, a very famous building. That a few years later, the Blue Nile Sailing Club, also in Khartoum, they had their eye on a piece of land next to their property. And, as you may know, if there's a tradition in Islamic culture that if you build a mosque on a piece of land, then that's your land, basically. So they built this structure, which is very much inspired by this big mosque, and then obtained that piece of land next to theirs. They never used it as a mosque; they used it as a cafeteria. But structurally, it's like a little mini Al Nilin mosque in the same, more or less in the same city. This is in Indonesia. This is the underground mosque in Yogyakarta, which well, you'll have to read the story in the book, but it combines different religious traditions, Islam, of course, but also the indigenous religious tradition, and how that works is, the Sultan would sit in the middle there, in the middle, open to the heavens, and yeah. So I've also got a lot of contemporary, because that's what I wanted to do as well. I don't want this to be a book about the past. I want the book also to show what a selection of contemporary architecture, because there is so much excellent stuff out there. So the left is the Zaha Hadid design in Saudi Arabia, Musala, and the right is in Bangladesh, right, by Louis Khan. He built this the parliament for Bangladesh, and this was the adjacent prayer hall of the mosque. Extraordinary. This is in Sharjah. It appeals to me especially, considering my interest in Islamic geometric design. It's called the Flying Saucer, and it's just been renovated. Actually, they've turned it into a cultural center, but it used to be a supermarket. Don't know if you know this. The photo's a bit blurry. In the book, it's much better. But so this is in Sultan Caboose in Oman. So with a building like that, I think, okay, I can do a general photo of Sultan Caboose Mosque, but people know that, right? There's other books that can show that. And I saw this beautiful niche, because in the what do you call it, colonnade on the outside of the mosque, there are there's a couple of niches that have all been designed by different artists, and this one I think is exceptionally beautiful. Beautiful calligraphy, great colors. I thought, instead of doing a general photo of Sultan Caboose, let me do this as a photo of Sultan Caboose Mosque. That's maybe more interesting and more compelling. This photo I love because it also tells a story, with the little boy sitting there, and this amazing ceiling. It's a religious center for a famous, what's the word? Religious scholar, who is commemorated here. He was the one who said the first prayers in the first Ottoman Mosque in Bursa, of which I have a photo as well. The building's quite new, but the ceiling I think is pretty exceptional. It's in Sumatra. Grand Mosque of Sumatra, also a very interesting story of the motives of the designer. It relates to Muhammad, relates to the tribes that took the Black Rock to Mecca. Anyway, you have to buy the book to read it. So this combines traditional designs from Sumatra, especially in the treatment of the surface area. It looks very much like fabrics that they weave there. Now, it's not all sweetness and light, of course, because there are also problems around the world, right? And for example, this Uyghur mosque on the left. I was very pleased to find at least one photo. This building doesn't exist anymore. This was demolished in 2019 and bizarrely rebuilt at 25% size. And I think the Chinese government did this so that you could say, well, no, the mosque is still there, ridiculously. But they knocked this 15th century mosque down but at least I can put it in the book, right? It was an opportunity to capture something so that people can see this. And more or less the same with the picture top right. There's a Rohingya mosque in Myanmar. You know, there's not a lot of photos of mosques in Myanmar, I can tell you. But I thought this was a really great photo, so we put it in the book. It's got good colors, that photo. You know, it's you know, because that's what you look for as well. You know, it can't just be a functional photo. If all the photos are going to be beautiful, then this one has to be like that as well. Unfortunately, we found one. So, influence of Islamic architecture. I could write a whole book on this topic, actually. It's so interesting. But, you know, around the world, you find buildings, quite often secular buildings, but not always. That's, you know, you can easily see where the influence came from. So here in the left, that's in Dunkirk. These are the public baths. A dome, horseshoe arch. There used to be a chimney in the shape of a minaret as well. It's an amazing building. Here on the right, that's in Ecuador, in South America. So there's an interesting story. So it's especially the ceiling that I'm talking about here. Those coffered ceilings in this church. Those design skills came from Spain to South America and continue there. You know, and there's plenty of examples. Also in the Caribbean, in Cuba as well, of this style being exported around the world. This, you might not be able to guess where this is. This is in Dallas, Texas, to be precise. Looks like an Abbasid minaret, right? But it's not. And the photo on the left is the inside. And yeah, extraordinary building in an extraordinary location. On the left, it's the synagogue of Samarkand. And you can see that, you know, the dome interior is very much indebted to what you would see in Samarkand generally in Islamic architecture, but now in this case in a synagogue. Yeah, showing this same photo twice. So that's, you know, I mean, there's 350 photos, but I'm not going to show them all. Otherwise, there's no incentive for you to buy the book, obviously. It's hard to choose, right? It's very hard to choose. It's not even what do I put in, but it's more about what do I leave out. You know, well, that's the challenge, because, like I said, I went from 700 photos to 350, and I loved all 700 of them. But stuff has to be kicked out of the book sometimes. And what also had to be kicked out of the book were all my illustrations. So I made I think about 150 illustrations for the book. Not so much geometric patterns, because I've already done that, but more, well, I'll show you a few things that we thought would make the book even more interesting. But then when we were laying out the book and the book pages were looking so nice and crisp with just photos and text, and when we put illustrations on the page, we were like, oh my goodness, this looks terrible. This looks terrible. You know, it makes the book worse rather than better. Then we tried to put the illustrations in the back as an appendix, but then, you know, we had to sacrifice 20 pages, and I'd rather have 20 pages of photos. So in the end, we said, okay, fine, we'll just get rid of all of it. So we'll see what happens. Maybe there's other opportunities to publish this. But so, for example, top left is a Mamluk pattern in cut stone. Bottom left is a pattern on the Mosque of Cordoba in Spain. The two patterns on the right are on the marble basin in the center of the Court of the Lions in the Alhambra. Yeah, you might be familiar with this big basin that is sitting on the back of 8 lions. And there's a poem written on the basin, which we have reproduced in the book. And I was going to put this in the book as well, because it's, you know, it's a really great pattern, but there's no space, sadly. Then what also didn't end up in the book are these Seljuk brick patterns from minarets on the left. The middle one is a complete reconstruction of a pattern for one Seljuk minaret. There's no space for that. Thing on the right is also, well, it's a beautiful square Kufic calligraphic panel that you read starting at the bottom right and then spiraling inwards. So I completely reproduced that and analyzed it, separating this. I think it's there's 66 names of Allah in there. But yeah, no space. Then I did this, the Pythagorean theorem, which you see a lot in, or you see frequently reproduced in Islamic architecture, in doors, in geometric panels like the one on the top left. That's a ceramic panel. And it's interesting because it's not just a pretty pattern, there's something more going on. So I thought, let me show what more is going on. And as I said, it relates to Pythagoras. So I thought that would be quite interesting. And then I had some sections about how to make a beautiful dome. And I had something about the golden mean as shown in the side of this building. And the golden mean meaning A is to B as B is to A and B together. And that's what's being used in this pattern in the photo and also the reproduction bottom left. Anyway. Oh, and this, this is Cordoba Mosque. So interestingly, the Mosque of Cordoba expanded, as you can see, in about 2 centuries, several times. It started as a square, step 1, and then it was too small, so they thought, let's make it bigger. So they took a compass, drew a diagonal, and with a compass, they were able to make it bigger. Then step 3, they had to make it bigger again. Again, they used just a compass and an arch. Step 4, the same, and step 5, the same. So the point being is that you can see in the great mosque in the Mezquita in Cordoba that just by using a compass, drawing a circle or an arc, that's how they created their new volumes, their new expansion phases. Very simple. Anyway, no space for that. So let me see how we're doing for time. Okay, I'm almost done. So how did I come to write this book? Well, I'm from Amsterdam, and I was studying Middle Eastern politics. And at some point, I thought, Lord, it's interesting, but it's not interesting enough, And I want a big challenge. I want to really, what am I going to do with my life? What can I give to the world? What can I, what will make me a useful member of society, or what can I contribute to the world, basically. And I didn't know what that was, but I did know that I was very interested in Islamic architecture. And I bought, this is one of the first books I bought by Ola Grabar. Then I bought this book by Robert Hillenbrand. I bought this book and I loved it. It really spoke to me. And it's, I thought this is what I want. This is what I want to do. But in Holland, you can't study Islamic architecture. And I also had too much energy to be satisfied with academic study. So I put all my energy into Islamic Geometric Design, teaching myself that with a compass and a ruler for 10 years in Amsterdam. And I didn't know anyone who did the same, just my parents saying, oh, that's nice. I see somebody has raised his hand and asked a question, but shall we keep that until the end? Because I'm almost done and then we can do all that together. So that's what I did. So my passion was Islamic architecture. I know I wanted to get there. I didn't know how to get there, but I had faith and I thought, well, I will do this. This is what I'm supposed to do. I knew that. I knew I had to do that. Although I didn't understand it, I knew it. And that's what I did. So then after 10 years of my parents and friends telling me that I was clever and it was all very nice, I thought I need something more. So I sold my house, moved to London to study at the Prince's School of Traditional Arts, where the teacher at the time was a gentleman who wrote a famous book on Islamic Geometric Design. And then they said, yes, that's a good idea. And then I did my Islamic Design workbook, which they also liked. And then eventually, a couple of years ago, they approached me because I'd sent them a number of different proposals that they all declined, book on Muqarnas and other things. But then they said, Eric, could you write a book on Islamic architecture? And what do you think that should look like? So I said, yeah, I'd love to. I would love to do that. And here we are. So coming out in July, August. So what else did I want to say? So that's really it. For me, it's a miracle. I love Islamic architecture, but a lot of other people do as well. And the fact that I've been able to write this book, it's a gift. It's a gift from heaven for me. This is in Wales, in Cardiff, if anybody's wondering. Pretty amazing. And then lastly, so This is in Saudi Arabia. This was the most difficult mosque to find information about because I love it. I think it's beautiful, but it's in Al Khobar on the Corniche, and it often gets confused with the Corniche Mosque in Jeddah. And when you look online, there's like loads of confusion, misattributions and all sorts of stuff. So if there's anybody in the audience who can tell me who the architect is, I would love to hear it. It's not Al-Wakil, because he did the one in Jeddah. It's the Salam bin Laden Mosque. That's the name, built in 1991. But it's been extremely difficult to find information, reliable information. But I think it's such a beautiful building and a beautiful photo. I really wanted to keep it in the book. That's it. So if you want to follow me, keep track of what I'm doing, follow me on Instagram. That's probably the best. I don't do much else. I'm on Twitter, but I don't really do very much on there. But Instagram, I do.
Thank you, Mr. Eric, for the presentation and the talk. We have a few questions here, and maybe we can have some vocal questions also. But I will take the written ones because we received them earlier. We have one from Dr. Abir Laham, the book. She says the book is classified in its chapters on geographical basis and expands historically from the beginning of Islam until the present day in Europe and the Americas. What is your definition of Islamic architecture that can embrace all the variety of buildings geographically and historically?
It's such a difficult question, because I've had the same issue with my books on Islamic geometric design. So, for example, Islamic geometric design is not the best term, but it's the least bad term. And it's a little bit like that with Islamic architecture as well. I mean, in the book, I don't try to define it because other books already do that. And like I said, if the book title could have been Architecture of Islamic Societies, that would have been better. But then still, there are buildings like the public baths in Dunkirk are in there, and there's all sorts of other buildings in there that only lend from the visual aspects rather than the more spiritual aspects or profound aspects of Islamic architecture. So, my book doesn't have to do everything. It's also about thinking because I read a lot of books, of course, and I read a lot of articles on Islamic architecture, and it's a very, it's always a debate. If you call something Islamic architecture, what are you saying? Are you saying that these buildings are indebted to Islamic religious precepts, concepts? No, that's not always the case, because there are also, secular buildings. So it's hard to get. It's impossible to give a definitive answer to that, and also because it's fluid, right? These things also change as a consequence of debate on the topic. So I'm not trying to evade and be evasive. It's just almost impossible to answer. To me, most of the buildings in the book are created in Islamic societies, but not even all of them. So it's imperfect, but it's impossible to come up with something that really describes it without any exceptions.
Also, there's a second part of the question. The presentation focused on physical dimension of Islamic architecture from around the world. Is there an argument that the book puts forward along with the collection of pictures that you have in the book?
Well, the argument that I put forward really is that Islamic architecture is global, and for somebody who, I studied Islamic architecture, I did my master's in that, and I still read. When you look at the research that's available, academic articles and books, it's so narrow. If you want to read about the Timurid architecture or Mamluk architecture, your biggest challenge is what am I going to read first of the hundreds of articles? But if I want to read something from the architecture in the Sokoto Caliphate in Nigeria, there's nothing. That Uyghur mosque, the Kargalik mosque, I have found nothing. I have found nothing. Equally with mosques, Cham mosques in Cambodia, you think, okay, that's maybe a bit niche, but still, it merits research. There's nothing. So for me, even though this is not an academic book, I really think that, why would there be so little about Islamic architecture in Southeast Asia? Why is nobody writing about that? Or no, I say nobody. Why is almost nobody writing about that? And certainly in the academic mainstream, if I see a table of contents for a new journal issue or whatever, I always look at it. It's Mamluk again, and it's Ottoman again, and it's Safavid again. And there are so many areas of the world that are in desperate need of documentation and research, but are not getting it. And even in the Gulf, if I look at those beautiful plaster mihrabs in Oman, show me an article that writes about that. It's weird. It's weird, and it's something that for me personally, that's why I was passionate about this book, just to rebalance that a little bit in a small way. Yeah.
There is a question from Rinaldo. He says, great presentation. Is there a book in Islamic tradition like Palladio or Vitruvius to help design Islamic columns, capitals, arches, and buildings?
There isn't really, there isn't. Well, maybe there was, but maybe the book got lost in history. Who knows? But there isn't. So if a related area, of course, is Islamic Geometric Design. There's something called the Tokapi scroll, for example, which also shows Mukarnos construction and three-dimensional constructions and things like that. That's quite often identified as a book that is a bit like that, but it's not, because it's not a handbook that architects use. It's just something that somebody in the Timurid court, was told by the Sultan to go and have a look what these guys are doing, and document what they're designing. There's not. I mean, if you look at the Mamluk era, for example, right? Mamluk architecture is very well documented, not just in the 20th and 21st century, but also at the time. And there is evidence that you can put together on how buildings were constructed, how buildings were squeezed into an existing urban structure. And there is some information also about, like with Mosque of Cordoba, that you can see how they expanded this, or in Timurid buildings, how they created sympathetic proportions between a pishtak, big entrance portal, and adjacent buildings. But it's more by deduction than by contemporaneous documents, if you see what I mean. Mm-hmm. But no, I mean, it's a topic, right? I mean, if somebody were to do that.
Yes, there is a question from Sami about Islamic arts. Is it necessarily based on precise mathematical law?
So there's a famous historical document by Al-Bujani, which there's a couple of interesting academic articles about it, which describes a conversation between mathematicians, or the conversation between scientists and craftspeople in, where was it now? I think Timurid era. Yeah, so a couple of centuries ago. And the idea was that these two groups, the court and the people in the town, were brought together to discuss geometry, and to see, if there was any consensus about anything. And the only consensus really that there was is that the craftsmen cared about beauty and the mathematicians cared about precision. And if you look at geometric designs, it's true quite often that the objective is not to be mathematically accurate. The objective is to make something beautiful, which hopefully will be mathematically accurate. But if something needs to be massaged to make it fit, then that's fine. So it's the mathematics helps, it creates a structure, it creates a context, and it's important. I'm not saying it's not important, it is important, but it's not the most important part, right? Creating something of beauty, that's the most important part. And if it means that sometimes, a geometric star needs to be squeezed a little bit in one direction to make it fit, like you see in those Mamluk minbar panels, for example, then that's perfectly legitimate.
We have a question from Yusuf. Can you talk about the idea that in geometry there is a universal language and Islamic architecture is expressing it?
No, I didn't hear the last bit of the question. You can still hear me, right?
Yeah, I hear you. I will repeat the question. Can you talk about the idea that in geometry there is a universal language and Islamic architecture is expressing of it, or the expression of that of it?
Well, I think Islamic geometric design is a universal language, right? And it's something you can learn to read and to write. And if you think, I always like to imagine, for example, a trader in Mamluk Cairo who gets on his horse or gets into a caravan and goes all the way to Isfahan from Cairo, and then he's familiar with the Mamluk geometric designs in Cairo, and then he arrives in Isfahan and he sees different geometric patterns, different materials, but also different designs. But he's still able to read it because the shapes that are used are more or less the same, even though they might be arranged in a different way.
Last
question. The letters.
Yeah, sorry. I just have one last question from Murad. He's asking about the Arabic calligraphy in general, but I will just add, what is the importance of Arabic calligraphy in the geometry of design? And did you learn it, or did you try to apply it in your designs?
No, I mean, calligraphy is something you have to do with complete dedication. Otherwise, you shouldn't even start. I had 1 week of Islamic calligraphy lesson when I was at the Prince's School, but I wasn't even allowed to write anything. We were only allowed to hold. So, but the broader point is that in generally in Islamic architecture, you would seek a harmony, you would seek a balance, and especially a balance between rectilinear and curvilinear. And the rectilinear is the geometry, and the curvilinear is quite often the calligraphy, or it can also be floral ornamentation. So in a broader context, they need each other. They need each other, and quite often in contemporary architecture, you see that geometry is used without anything else. So it becomes very, very, very hard and very strong without benefiting from some balance with curvilinear. So in my opinion, they belong together. So I mean, I admire calligraphy, but I know as much as an average person, I think.
Yeah. Can we have last question? It is from Muswan, I think. She or he is asking, what drives you to keep on going and always discovering something new, and especially in geometric, Islamic geometric, let's say. And what would be your advice for the upcoming generations?
Well, I mean, what motivates me is, I had a dream, and you have to hold on to your dreams. My dream was to have a life that revolves around Islamic architecture. I don't know why that is, but it is, and that's it. So what motivates me is that I don't want to give up, and you have to persevere. And certainly the last few years during the pandemic, it's just sometimes it's hard, but it's everybody has those struggles, especially if you're doing something creative. Because no, it doesn't always result in a big salary or immediate pats on the back and rewards, but nevertheless you keep going. So my advice is, whatever you do, be serious and make a commitment. I mean, for me, I'm a white middle-class Dutch guy from Holland. When I first got into Islamic geometric design, even I thought I was crazy. But I thought, well, if this is what I'm going to do, then this is what I'm going to do. you know. And then if I'm going to do it, I'm not going to do it as a hobby. I'm going to do it as what I'm going to do in life, my calling, you know. And it is a calling. I didn't choose it to be a calling. That's what it is. So that's it, you know. So then you just do it, and you don't worry too much about whether you're motivated or whether you feel like it. That's it. This is what you do. So that's how it was for me. You just, you know, don't give up.
Thank you, Mr. Eric. Thank you again for accepting our invitation and being with us today, and for this fabulous presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.